Ladies and gentlemen, we have a live recording happening right here for the second episode of The Bridge with Kira 2015. Grand entry, Yellow Thunder's Mama, take it away. Well, all right. Looks like we got this powwow started right. Thank you, everybody, for joining me here tonight. It is the second episode of The Bridge 2015, and I am your host, Kira Young, and you've reached me on peoplesinternetradio.com. My guest tonight is a writer, an artist, and a free-thinking mystic. You can find his work on thesyncbook.com and allthehappycreatures.com. Welcome to The Bridge, Alan Abbadessa Green.
Thank you so much. It's really such a pleasure to be with you.
I was so excited that you accepted my invitation to come here because I don't often really get to talk about the topics that you delve into. So I've been binging on you all week to figure out what you're all about, and there's a lot of really good stuff that's come up in your other interviews and some of the stuff that you're doing yourself.
Well, if you figured out what I'm all about, please let me know. I'm still trying to figure it out myself. So,
and it's ever evolving. So once you figure it out, it changes. But I like what I'm hearing about science and religion. I like your balance there. If you, when you talk about religion in this community and about spirituality and about mysticism even, it seems to kind of scare people and turn people off because we're of this point of view that we've been fooled and we've been socially engineered and messed with and had our archetypes pimped out, so people don't want to get into it at all, but that's actually where we really learn about ourselves. And exactly how our archetypes have pimped.
We do this weird thing, right? Like all of us in this sort of weird alternate research field, this sort of ever-evolving truth-seeking movement, whatever we want to label it as. We're always kind of cynical about not wanting to get taken advantage of, which is very, very healthy. Particularly with as much manipulation is out there. We certainly see that. But we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we see that all types of religious iconography has been used to control people for thousands of years, but that doesn't mean that it's the whole reason that it would work as a control mechanism is because it's hardwired into us. So all I'm really trying to do is figure out what is that wiring, and instead of freeing the symbols and the archetypes, taking some control back and reconnecting with those things on our own terms and cutting out the marketing executives and politicians who want to hijack those symbols.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that's going on now is this people of European heritage and European people realizing that, hey, we were colonized first, and these Abrahamic religions aren't really ours, to begin with, but they've kind of become ours. So how do we map that out, and how do we decolonize our minds too? As far as your people of European heritage.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like I remember seeing, I feel like so much has changed so fast on the internet, but even if you go back to, remember when that Zeitgeist movie first came out, was making the rounds, and it was this was really freeing a lot of people to expose them to different types of information, but the sort of one of the opening sequences of that is showing how all these different religions use the same sort of symbol sets and the same, this guy's born on December 25th and he has 12 followers and, born of a virgin mother and all these sorts of things, and saying, hey, look, this is clearly all BS. And my sort of take from that is, whoa, I'm with you all the way up to there, and then to say, can we, for lack of a better term, reverse engineer and say, is there a reason that we've kept these things alive? Is there a meaning that's in there to show that Christianity is based on astrological signs, let's say? Does that mean that it's bogus? Or does it mean, they were trying to point us, someone along the line was trying to keep this information alive, that we have some sort of connection between the land, our lives, the skies above us, and trying to keep that sort of, that mystery and any connection to it intact. And again, we can, I'm no way an apologist for anyone who tried to hijack these things to control people. You talk about people in Europe, obviously the Christian churches, as they grew into power, we have like really obvious examples like, you guys celebrate, on October 31st, we have this period which we consider a thin veil between our world and the spirit realm. We can have contact with the deceased, and the church comes in and says, okay, we'll just call that All Saints Day and All Souls Day, where we remember the dead. And then modern Western lands turn it into a Halloween celebration and stuff like that. And we've kept kind of these weird little elements of it, but completely lost connection with the people, our ancestors, who recognized these, again, how shall I say this? I'm not arguing that that's literally true, that there is a thin, the veil between this realm and the next is thinnest at that point of the year. I don't know if that's actually true, but to say that that was something they were trying to keep alive and celebrating. Do we just toss that out because some church said, sure, we'll work that into our thing if you pay us a tithe instead of paying your local shaman?
Yeah,
that's such a common thing. It's again, anyone who's seen even Zeitgeist, they make, I believe it's in Zeitgeist, they make a point where they say there were points where the church said about like the Horus and Mithras and all these things, saying, yes, we believe the same just as you. This was an effort to colonize and co-opt those religions. I mean, we see it, every mega church has done this: tear down someone else's religion, their temple, their shrine, and put their own on top of it. So they're saying, this is now ours. You can still come to the place that you consider holy as long as you pray to what we want to call that God. And I guess all I'm trying to kind of argue is, but was that land underneath, was it holy? I mean, it doesn't mean the answer is yes, but just because we've got a phony institution built on top of it, again, do we throw the baby out with the bathwater there and say, oh, this institution's phony? That's a very healthy thing to do. But I guess I'm just asking, should we reconnect to that that land.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of land as sacred is something that I think about a lot because, the way that Native issues are portrayed to the mainstream is that we have these special places or these sacred places where we go to pray. And yes, that is true, but also we're taught that all land is sacred, that the earth is sacred because we're part of her and she's part of us, and we're this sort of it's your clue to how we're all connected. So yeah.
And there's I deal a lot with synchronicities, right? That's probably the largest thing I focus on is meaningful connections. But what I always have a very hard time talking about synchronicities because they're so personal. What is a synchronicity to me might be meaningless coincidence to you. I can try and explain it to you, but you don't have the personal context, that you don't feel it in your heart, that emotional tug by these circumstances coming together at this moment. The most that you can usually get out of someone, even someone who's very sympathetic, is oh wow, okay, that sounds cool. I get why that would mean something to you, but you're still not going to convey what it actually means to you. And the same is true with a lot of these sacred places. I know you had someone on your show, Andros Jones, who I'm very good friends with, I've been working with for a number of years, and he has found this place in Olympia, Washington, this Kabbalistic tree that is actually built into the structure of the town. And we've had many conversations about this, and his point is like, he found this, but he's not claiming that anyone should come make pilgrimages and, come see this magical thing here. It's that he realized, I'm living next to this sacred architecture. I want to respect that and acknowledge that. But all of us have sacred places to ourselves, and they don't have to be built into these esoteric symbols. Like I grew up very close to where the New York World's Fair is. And this is, it was a very corporate event, the World's Fair. There's all sorts of racial issues where the highways that were built to go to the thing, they actually built bridges very low so that buses couldn't get through. They figured that white people would have cars, but that black people would be taking buses. So they actually designed the roads so that buses couldn't get through as a way to deter black people from coming. And this, you have to realize this is in New York City, where this has affected not just the culture, but, transit for how many years has it impacted? Not to make light of it, but to say like, this has really big ramifications for everyone, no matter what your politics or, how far removed you want to say we are from that period in time. And the thing is, all the negativity that's obviously around this site, I grew up feeling that there was something really special about that place. And I would go there if I was ever feeling depressed or confused or just kind of wanted to clear my head. I would go to this park where 40 years earlier there had been a World's Fair, and it was basically the stuff was falling apart. It was a crumbling ruins, but there was something magical about it that I couldn't quite explain. And that to me was a very special place to me personally. That was my sacred site. And the conversation I've had with Andros over and over again is that like to encourage people to find their own sacred places, to find that in your own life. There's no, there's different people who are going to say Jerusalem is sacred, or, I have these friends up in Winnipeg, these synchro mystics that you say Winnipeg is so special. I'm sure it is, but it's going to be special to them maybe a lot more so than it is to me. Do you know what I'm saying? So yes, everything is special. There's a clearly esoteric idea, the center is everywhere. Everything is sacred. But within your own life, you find those things that are, if we can call it such, more sacred to you or more personal, the personal connection.
Yeah, like my creek, out back is sacred to me, like that. And most people haven't been to it. And maybe that's kind of one of the things that makes it sacred, is its remoteness, its, wildness, and because it was something I was looking for and I found.
Absolutely, yeah. And could you imagine if you had a bunch of tourists walking through there every day, it would probably become a little less special. Of course, you want to share it. You want to share it with people. I'm sure if you have friends or people that are special to you come over, you would want to share that experience with them. But there's a difference between that and, putting a roller coaster on top of it or something.
Right. It doesn't make it sacred anymore. It
right.
It has the opposite effect. So, let's get a little bit deeper into the synchro mysticism, cause it's new to me, but I've studied mysticism, for years, basically got my master's degree in it. But I understand it. I mean, I get it right away. I love it. I love that, people have, sort of reimagined, we lost our mystics in the West for a long time. And so, we kind of had to make it up in a way again. But in the other way, we didn't lose it because we were making it up again the whole way. If that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And that's just it. It's, this might sound, it's going to be a bold statement, but if the same way you said every piece of land is sacred, the whole thing is sacred. If we are, in a sense, divine creatures, read as much or as little into that phrasing as you want. I mean, language is so that could trigger someone, turn someone off, or someone can get what I mean. And just to say, if we are divine creatures, everything we do is going to have some spark of that in it. And I guess what we're looking for is a way to recognize what it is that we're doing, sometimes very often unconsciously, that is keeping these traditions or these archetypes alive. Now, I want to be very careful right up front because we can get into some really heady metaphysical questions of, is every act sacred? Is the United States Army bombing some child in Afghanistan sacred? I would have a really hard time defending that. But in another respect, it is certainly a playing out of an archetype. And we could take this as like a Jungian sense. We are certainly playing out these stories of conquering kings, of Ares and Mars, these warring figures. So they are still alive. That doesn't mean they're necessarily ideal actions, and that's something that's a little more personal to me. Maybe we can get there. I hope you'll sort of keep me in track in that respect, as I don't want to make this sound too light and fluffy, because I personally have a really strong desire to keep this balanced and sort of clear what I'm trying to say. But let's step back. Synchromysticism. This guy up in Winnipeg, Jake Kotza, coined the term, and the term has kind of gotten away from him. He'll be the first one to admit that. Even though he coined it, it's taken on a life of its own. He referred to it as seeing anything of esoteric or spiritual significance in pop culture. But what I think the spirit of it is, and obviously I shouldn't speak for him, but I think the spirit of synchromysticism is to say, you notice synchronicities, the way that everything in the universe is sort of interconnected. All actions, all beings, there's this sort of what we call wiring under the board. If you can imagine these invisible strings that connect us, and you can find this in so many different religions around the world or different esoteric traditions, and most people have a sort of innate understanding. When I say we are all connected, we kind of sense that to be true. What he was, I think the spirit of what he was trying to do is demonstrate that, show that. And again, if I say to you, oh man, it was the weirdest thing as I was thinking of my friend that I haven't spoken to in 30 years, and I was thinking about him, and man, I wonder what he's up to, and suddenly my phone rings and it's him, and I haven't spoken to him in 30 years. I'm like, what? That's crazy. Now we can get into the scientific aspect. Is that some sort of telepathy, right? Did I somehow send a telepathic message to him and that made him think of me, vice versa? Possible. That's certainly possible. Is it precognition? Did I somehow sense that he was going to call? Did I have a glimpse of the future that he was going to call? And that is actually what instigated my thinking of him. Again, possible. Let me clear it right up front. I don't have a direct answer for it. Saying these are all, different possibilities. These are something a little more scientific. Even if people want to call it pseudoscience, these might be some of the answers that we can go to. But regardless, the person experiencing it, and synchronicity, as Carl Jung would coin it, is a meaningful coincidence. So even a skeptic out there wants to say, well, it's just a coincidence, but it's the meaning, and it's what that personally is significant to you that adds a whole other layer to it. Now, again, these are very personal, so I can tell you that story, and you're going to go, oh wow, that's really interesting. But you're probably going to go about your day and not really read too much into that because it didn't happen to you. It didn't give you that same shivers up your spine. If I tell you about a dream I had, it's going to sound really abstract and kind of vague, and again, not really be meaningful, but we've all woken up in the middle of the night from this really profound vision in the middle of the night, shaken to our very core, because it was personal experience. Again, if I try and share it with you, that's very difficult. So I believe the spirit of what Jay Kotze was trying to do with synchromysticism is to say, what is it that we can share? What is our common context? And he's a guy who watched a lot of freaking movies. So he was able to say, okay, kind of think of almost like a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon like a really kind of get your mind in the right direction here, is to say he can look at a movie and say, look at this actor in this movie. Let's say, I don't know, Tom Cruise. I don't know. He's in this movie, and look, he's standing here and he picks up a purple tie and he says, I'm looking for my friend Kira. And then he happens to be in another movie 30 years ago that Jake is watching. He'll go and watch every Tom Cruise movie and find that 30 years ago, Tom Cruise was in this movie and picks up a purple tie and says, I'm looking for my friend Kira. And go, what the hell? What is that? Now, we could argue, again, this is not a perfect science, because we could argue, well, was that the filmmaker doing that intentionally? Was it the actor doing that intentionally? Was it an actual reference to the earlier movie, and so on, so on? But just to say, if he edits these two movie clips side by side, now we've had what is essentially like a shared dream, watching this vision, and we're both able to see the same vision and how these two things connect. Again, that to me is the spirit of synchromysticism, using pop culture as an easy sort of go-to relatable context that we can all look at the same picture, experience this same essentially shared dream, and just go, look at that. Isn't that interesting how these things connect? And then Jake would, go on and find 30 other movies where Tom Cruise is picking up purple ties and go, what the hell is happening here? I'm going to again go back to my friend Andras. The reason he has been really valuable to a number of us working in this is that he was an actor, granted not like a huge A-list star or anything, but he was in a number of Hollywood movies. And Will Morgan, who is a synchromistic filmmaker, he's the co-host of a podcast called 42 Minutes, and an excellent friend of mine. He did the same thing. He watched every movie that Andras was in and found these really bizarre and obvious connections between all the movies. When he pieces them all together, you're like, oh my God, that's really obvious. But the difference is Andras, I can actually call him up and say, hey, have you ever noticed this? When you were on the set of this movie, did you ever discuss that you were going to do this? And what he was able to verify is not only did he not realize it, but a lot of things weren't even significant to him till many years later. So Will Morgan would find, every movie that he was in, he's interacting with a redhead. Either his love interest is a redhead or his male sort of sexual rival would be a redhead. And Andras was able to confirm that he married a woman that was a redhead, but this was when he made these movies, he wasn't that at that point in his life, and that all these things, and he watched Will Morgan's take of his acting career and said, not only did I never realize this in my movies, I didn't realize how connected my personal life was with the personas, and again, many different personas that I played on the screen. So it was able to sort of verify that when we said the U.S. Army attacking someone in Pakistan is acting out an archetype, here we have literal actors, professional actors, who that's their job, is to perform words that someone else wrote for them, and they are still playing out these archetypes that they are in their own lives also playing out. And it just starts to point to all these interesting... The connotations of that are huge, because again, we could take that as either there's this, you personally are carrying this sort of story through your life. If someone wanted to take it from the more like Illuminati kind of perspective, they could say that, these actors are calling up certain archetypes, almost like summoning a spirit of something, and now they're possessed by it. I've heard people give that argument. It doesn't resonate with me at all, but again, let's put it on the table. All the implications are sort of maybe a little out there, but it's hard to deny that there is a phenomenon happening. And that's what I'm most interested in, is the answers. Every person that I speak to really gets a different take on what answer seems right to them. But what I'm really trying to do is collect all the people that are paying attention to this sort of thing, so at least we can get enough evidence together that the phenomenon is happening, or phenomena. Maybe there's multiple things at play here. But once we're able to all be on the same page and say it's happening, then we can start to get into what does it mean and how does it work? But can we at least get to the point where we can show people that this is something real and not just a pseudoscience or some new age fluffy thing?
Yeah, and
does that make sense at all?
Yes, absolutely. And even, for us who don't act, I am certainly, introspective enough to see various archetypes playing out in my own life. So to have that other, layer of also being an actor and having your, playing these personas or even acting out these personas in film as well is, it seems like it just amplifies what's already there. These are my thoughts about it, because, I definitely see archetypes playing out in my life, and I see sometimes when I wonder, why is this person reacting to me in this particular way? Because I'm a very easygoing person. I'm really very non-judgmental. And I can relate to people easily because I've kind of been all over the place and met all kinds of different people. But there are times when people really respond to me like they're afraid of me. And so I've even developed a sort of soft-spoken way, and I'm calm all the time. And I don't know if I just developed that or what, but I'm extremely calm to the point where people are like, do you ever get upset? And it's like, oh, you don't want to see that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know about this, is the archetype sort of more like a demon that overtakes someone? I think that's probably possible, but I think archetypes are different than that.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, I'm with you. I definitely think it's certainly possible, and even taking this into, in psychology, so Carl Jung is the guy who coined the term synchronicity, and he did a lot of work with archetypes and sort of developing his theories as to how they worked. But, he did talk about a sort of archetype possession, and but sort of making a distinction, not so much that it was necessarily like a living fourth dimensional entity like some David Icke type thing, which again, it's possible. I've certainly accepted as a possibility. But to say it's almost like this thing that you, for all intents and purposes, it's a living thing. It is a possession because that's how it acts. So whether or not you want to call it a living sort of non-human entity, whatever the frick you want to call it, knock yourself out. The point is the effect is just the same. And what Carl Jung's point was that if the easiest way, or the way you're most commonly going to end up with some sort of quote-unquote possession that you are not in control but the archetype is in control, is when you are unconscious of it happening. Or if you're trying to repress it. So we see let's say you were in Victorian England and everyone wants to repress the idea of sexuality, right? Oh, we don't do that. Of course you do that. You're creatures that you wouldn't be on this planet if people didn't have sex. Sex is a very vital part of our very being. It's a sacred act. It can also be an animal act. But when we try and just make it something perverse, we end up pushing it away and it acts out in different ways. And now I would argue here in the West, we've kind of done, in a sense, like the opposite, where we're hypersexualized, but we're not actually, Frank Zappa made this point that he said it's all titillation. It's all titillation. He said, if you watch TV, you're going to see all these advertisements of people in sexy clothes and being provocative, but we don't show nudity, right? So it's all titillation. It's constantly in your face, but never satisfaction. If I can be somewhat, it's almost like a perpetual blue balls for the Western culture. And this in itself is another way that we are perverting a natural instinct, and we are not fully expressing. We keep calling out this archetype. We keep calling it this very powerful human energy, but we're not expressing it in the right way, and we're not actually acting on it. So we see people act out with all these sort of end up with these bizarre fetishes. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, just to say that we end up fetishizing everything rather than actually wanting something or longing for something. We fetishize it. And that would be like a repressing of an archetype. You can't hide it. It's like this thing that you can keep trying to sweep it under the bed, but the more you do that, the more it will take control of you. And that was a point that Jung was making. Whether we want to call that a spirit possession or not, for all intents and purposes, it will rule you. And this is, this might be like something like, if we're taking the sexual idea, this is Eros. This would be this god of love and sexuality. If the more you try and repress it and pretend like you're not sensing what a normal human attraction, the more you might find yourself, out of control, that you either want to have sex with everything or you want to have sex with a 5-year-old or, with a shoe in a closet or something, it's going to assert itself. And if you don't confront it and own it and find a way to look yourself in the mirror and find a place where you're honest with yourself about your sexuality or your anger, let's say. I was telling this the other day. My father-in-law made a joke, something about me being a pacifist, and I said, "Oh, I was a pacifist once." I was a pacifist for about a year, but it wasn't what I thought it was. or I should say I thought I was a pacifist for a year. I decided I was just gonna kind of be okay with everything. And I was a younger man who was living, I had a roommate, and I was really trying, I wouldn't kill a mosquito, you know, like, okay, if a mosquito is in the house, I'm gonna try and catch it and let it outside. Didn't want to harm anything, and I just wanted to kind of make peace with the universe, was sort of how I saw it in my mind. But then I had a roommate that was stealing money from me, and I knew it, but I was like, okay, well, if he needs the money, that's okay. That's okay. And I kept trying to tell myself that was okay, which I obviously wasn't okay with it. And then came one day a boiling point where I literally chased the man through the streets and almost killed him because I just snapped, like, how dare you do this to me? But if I had accepted normal, righteous indignation when it first happened, hey, you stole from me, sorry, our contract is broken, I can't trust you, give me my money and get the hell out. Right? That's a very appropriate thing to do in that situation. Pretending like everything is fine is not true to yourself. So I repressed that anger, and then it came a point that I had no control over it. And I was literally unable to control it, and I almost did something very extremely violent. And here I was thinking that calling myself a pacifist. So this is, I think, maybe a really good example of how things can possess us or take control of us if we're not honest with them and confronting them. And this is why a large part of what we're trying to do is bring these things to the conscious level, to recognize them for what they are. And sometimes this is very ugly. Sometimes this means looking at ourselves and going, oh man, you know what? I'm really not perfect. Oh man, you know what? I'm fallible just like anybody else. And these are my weak points. And these are the things that I try not to think about or try not to accept about myself. This is probably why this is usually done in a doctor's office, to psychoanalysts. It's like it's going to give you that safe place, right, to explore these things.
In theory. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. In theory, what we're doing is, and again, this is not always, I don't think this is for everyone. I think there's a lot of people, I've met a lot of people who find this more difficult than others. The more sort of stuff you have buried under there that you don't want to look at, the harder this process can be. But very often what I've discovered is that the synchronicities in your life are pointing to these unconscious archetypes. And if you can, the more you pay attention to them, the more they can sort of show you what it is that the story that you're enacting. And you might look at that story and go, hey, wait a second, do I keep doing this horrible thing, whatever it is? Oh, do I keep, yelling at my wife or husband about some trivial thing? What is it that's really angering me? Or, whatever the example might be. But very often the synchronicities actually seem to point to that. And, we're, more often than not, I think we're kind of trying to encourage people to face those demons and face that darkness. I can't give the exact quote, but Carl Jung said something like, the way to expel darkness in your life is, I'm totally screwing the quote up, but it's basically like, you don't just shine a light. It's not like by being happier or more cheery that you're going to get rid of the darkness. It's by making the darkness conscious, by bringing your full attention to it, facing it head on, looking at your own shadow and realizing what it is that you do. Now, I will say, for some people, this is too much to bear. I'm not promoting psychoanalysis. I have very mixed feelings about that whole thing. I'm not a professional psychiatrist or psychologist. I have no connection to that industry, and I think it's more often than not, it's the practices, as you alluded to, are not actually healthy ones. But I think if there comes a point that you're really unable to handle it, as I've encountered some people who just, by becoming a public figure like this, I've gotten emails from people who are having a really, really hard time with it. Sometimes the synchronicities, once you start paying attention to them, oftentimes they'll kind of like flare up. They'll become pretty intense. And for some people, this can be a real, almost like a psychological breakdown. I would argue, almost like from a shamanic standpoint, this breakdown is necessary. It's necessary to fully go through that experience. But, not everyone's prepared for it. You wouldn't, if you took a child that didn't know how to swim, you could throw them into the deep end of the pool and say, all right, some people will instinctively figure it out, how to survive, and others would drown if you did that to them. So, if you're going to encourage that, I feel like you should have a lifeguard on duty, if that metaphor sort of makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. It's tricky. It's tricky, and it's not for everyone. I would definitely agree with you about that. And there's also the whole, aspect of the way that we're hardwired as humans. And, the fact that there are, 1% of the population that, like to use our hardwiredness and any type of knowledge of, the way we work, against us, or, and that's why I say in theory, because one really bad, psychologist or one psychopath that decides to mess people up by becoming a therapist or something, can really damage people. And then yeah, so,
what I've been, if I may just say, what I've been trying to promote, again, I don't promote, psychoanalysis, professional psychoanalysis unless it's really like an extreme case. Absolutely. If you need help, I had a friend in synchromysticism, a woman who goes by the name of Sybil Hunter, who said this years ago. And when she first said it, I was kind of taken aback by the statement. She's like, if someone really needs help, they should go to a psychiatrist or, get professional help. And I'm sort of such a cynic about any of the quote unquote professional medical industrial complex that I was really taken aback by it. But again, just in the last few years, people have sent me personal emails that I've realized that even friends and colleagues and people on the internet are just not prepared to handle. So that's the only reason that I've actually softened to that stance, again, in extreme circumstances. But what I would much rather promote is the idea that we have a community, this has been hard. I've been trying for the last number of years to really build a community around this, a community atmosphere, a friendly atmosphere, not like some Freemasonic secret society, not like some sort of cult, not like, something like that, and not just an academic thing, but something where we at least have enough people that we can lean on, that if we have, 50, 100, 200 people that all kind of know each other's names and share synchronicities now and then, when someone is going through a really hard time, there should be enough people there who have experienced something similar that we as a community can kind of carry each other through this and say, hey man, I know this is gonna be over. Like, if you need to talk, we can just talk and be friends, I'll hear you out. Someone just having a shoulder there, having someone you can confide in, having someone you can lean on will be enough to carry you through that hard time. And I've really been trying to encourage this idea of community around this. It's had its pitfalls here and there. People are people, and some people have weird, like, professional issues with each other or personal, they rub each other the wrong way and all that sort of stuff. But I really feel like that would be the answer for this sort of stuff, much more so than psychoanalysis or anything like that.
Yeah, and you especially have to be careful if you're somebody who's, been given, psychoactive drugs and things like that. Not to, just go off them and stuff like that. You have to taper and, talk to somebody about it, or, because, well, what we're dealing with is that we've been told for so long that when you feel normal things like grief and anger and despair, that there's something wrong with you if it lasts longer than whatever they say. If it persists. Right. And I imagine, if it lasts a long time, you're not, you're going to want to need some sort of assistance to get out of it. But the thing is like, those things are natural human emotions. And, when we live in the culture that we live in, where we're, at some point, if you have a certain degree of intelligence or you're, observant in any way, you start to notice that something is wrong. Like what we're taught is not exactly what's actually going on. And, you start to see the difference between the ideals and the reality of, what we're living in. And so as a young person, young people naturally say, well, fuck this, and now, they're getting drugged and they're, getting told there's something wrong with their brain chemistry, and they go seeking assistance, and then they do get their brain chemistry messed up by these drugs that are given to them for being normal, but just going through a difficult time.
Yeah. I actually worked as a pharmacy technician for many years. Like when I first went to college, that was the job that I happened to get to sort of pay for my schooling, and I stuck with it for at least 10 years. It was a pretty good paying job, and the more I learned about what I was doing there, and seeing the way people were being, how should I say this? There's a distinction between someone abusing drugs and the drugs abusing them. Seeing the way that this medical system was so taking advantage of people, it became really unbearable for me to stay in it. And I now do a lot, I have a lot harder time making ends meet financially, but I sleep a lot better at night. But I tried for a number of years, like before I left the field, I tried like talking to other people and to see if they would see this, but it's like talking, I don't know, I guess it's kind of like, the way we might talk about a conspiracy or something to someone who doesn't even, not even a conspiracy, just like an idea of, hey, when you have that person who says like, oh, it doesn't matter if the government's tapping your phone lines. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't mind, or something like that. When you talk to someone like that and you're like, there is no way I'm getting through to this person. We're just on two very different perspectives here. That was the kind of thing I came up against over and over and over again. And I realized that a lot of it was financially based, because you would have these pharmacists who, some of them were younger than me, just finished 6 years of schooling, intense 6 years of non-stop schooling, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in debt to get this license. Now they suddenly have money coming in, great money. Once you get your pharmacy license, you're making at least $90,000 a year. You're getting social prestige. You're now a doctor. Any pharmacist in the last, 5-10 years, they get a doctorate with it, so you're now a doctor of pharmacy. So anyway, they're a doctor. They're somebody in society. They're making good money. And when you try and point out to them that, hey, do you realize, this textbook that you studied in school, look at the first page of the book. Look who wrote the freaking textbook. It was the drug manufacturer wrote your textbook. Don't you think it's a conflict of interest? Don't you think, just pointing out different things. I worked with a Greek pharmacist once, and I said to her, hey, just out of curiosity, do you speak Greek? She said, yeah. I said, yeah, so tell me, what does, pharmaiki mean in Greek? And she said, well, poison, but that doesn't mean anything, And I'm like, it's in the word. it's what we're doing. The industry is based around it. And I tried really hard to get through to people, but as I said, either they had, been sufficiently sort of indoctrinated into the industry or had, too much of a financial incentive, too much time invested, too much money invested, that it made it a hell of a lot easier to put the blinders on. For me, I wasn't a pharmacist. I was just a pharmacy technician, and it was a lot easier for me to walk away. But it's pretty darn bad. It's worse than you might even imagine. Like actually being in it, I could tell you it's probably even worse than most people in the alternative research community. People talk about, oh, it's so bad. Like, no, it's actually probably worse than that.
Yeah. The FDA doesn't protect us from anything, at all.
No.
So that's a joke. And then, you get into, the food that we're eating, that's making us sick. I mean, that's just a fact. That's just a scientific fact that the food we're now eating is making us all sick. So, and then you have a drug industry, that puts drugs out to medicate symptoms. Symptoms of what? The food you're eating poisoning you. And it's called all these different syndromes and all these different autoimmune diseases based on the way it affects different people, but it's the same thing. It's poison. You're being poisoned by the drugs that you're taking because you're being poisoned by the food that you're eating, so, you go to this health system to help you and say, God, why do I have peripheral neuropathy, at 30? Why do I hurt? What's going on? And they just give you drugs. And they name it something like fibromyalgia or whatever. Tired all the time syndrome, whatever, restless leg. Here, take this drug. And then, you won't be able to think your way out of a paper bag, much less the fact that they're just drugging your symptoms and doing nothing about what's causing the problems. So that's my rant.
No, I'm so with you. And like I said, I mean, I see it. And one of my biggest sort of issues, so, we can go here if we want. Like I'll just say, I'm a fan of, certain drugs that are illegal. I think marijuana is an excellent, drug, plant medication, whatever term you want to use for it. I think it has a ton of excellent uses. And some of which are just purely recreational and nothing wrong with that, but some of which are, I think, really, really powerful, both actually physiologically, fighting cancer or aiding in some of these more spiritual questions. But so to say, like, sort of full disclosure here, I am actually more in agreement with some of these other items. And I feel that's important to sort of put out there before I say this, but what I found that it was more honest, and I said this one too many times to, professional pharmacists in the industry, it really, really offended them every time I said it, but I couldn't help but say it. It was just how I felt. Was if you go to buy weed off somebody on the street, there's no questions asked. There's no level of dishonesty. I have this thing? Do you want it? That'll be $10-20. It's a really clear contract. However, and so, if you just, some people don't like anything like that, that's fine. But my point is simply that is a really clear and honest contract between two people. You want this substance? Here you go. Give me money. We're done here. However, when you put on a white coat and you put a bunch of framed plaques on the wall saying how important and educated you are, and you sit someone down and say, now you really need to take this, that to me is so much worse. Because I watched people, very healthy people, a guy that I knew that got into a car accident. He was a customer at a pharmacy I worked at. He had gotten into a motorcycle accident, actually, and they gave him something for pain. And the guy, within weeks, was so freaking addicted that he turned into a junkie before my eyes. I watched over a few-week period this guy just completely deteriorate. Now, the distinction is, if he went to a guy on the street to buy heroin, he at least knows going into that purchase of heroin, oh man, I'm buying heroin. This is probably not good for me, But if you have a guy in a white coat that you're told has this level of authority and all the sort of social brainwashing that comes with that, and you are told in absolute assured confidence that you need this thing, this is what will make you better. To me, maybe now that we have more information available through the internet, it's becoming less and less of an excusable action, but I would still say that person is a victim. Whereas the person that goes and buys heroin off the street is not. That, and for the record, let me just be very clear. I jumped from marijuana to heroin. I think heroin is a horrible, horrible drug. So I don't mean to conflate, when I said I was in support of some illegal substances. Very anti-heroin, personally. But, I guess my point was to say, at least the person doing that, I wouldn't consider them a victim. Do you know what I'm saying? That's someone who made a decision to take a substance that they, going into it, this probably isn't good for me. I just feel like there's such a distinction there. I would also just, speaking of this idea of, you said, treating symptoms, I would also argue that we do that, our culture particularly, I think why a lot of these sort of spiritual things are dismissed as either new age fluff or whatever, is because unfortunately, more often than not, they are doing the exact same thing. They're treating symptoms. The same way that if you go to a doctor and you say, my cat just died, my husband died, my grandmother died, whatever, I'm feeling, as you said, natural human grief. This is that just means you're a human being, that you're feeling this loss and you're dealing with that grief. That is a very real and necessary thing to experience. To make peace with, I think you feel like you have to go through that natural process to make your peace with this separation. Again, it's not always pretty, it's not always easy, but you have to go through it. If you go to your doctor and he gives you a pill and say, here, this will just, cure the symptom or fight the symptom, you haven't actually made your peace with it. And I feel like a lot of this, new age sort of spiritual stuff does the same thing. In a different way. It's like spiritual band-aids,
Well, yeah, and then there's the same idea that, well, if you're sick, it's because there's something inherently wrong with you. And, and then you get the new age thing on top. That's what the doctors are saying. Okay, your body is responding. Your immune system's responding normally to being poisoned. You go to the doctor says, there's something wrong with you. Not your body's responding normally to being poisoned, right? Then you go to the new age practitioner, that's selling vitamins or whatever, and they tell you, well, you didn't work something out in your past life, or like you want to be sick. There must be some part of your spirit that just wants this, it's like, no.
Right.
Fuck no. Fuck both of those. That doesn't work for me.
Oh yeah. It's funny because I haven't spoken to anyone in the pharmaceutical industry in a number of years, probably over 10 years, but, I do sure speak to a lot of new age people, because I deal with metaphysical concepts and synchronicities and, flat out mysticism. Like I'm really very genuinely interested in a lot of these things that have an overlap with a lot of people with, strong new age beliefs. So I talk to them pretty often and, that shit really bothers me. Like, as you said, when someone says, you just want this, unless...
Or you did something to draw it into your life,
Right.
Yeah, I ate poison that I didn't know was poison my whole life,
Right. I think there's, it's the sort of thing where I might actually agree to a certain extent with the concept that's being expressed, not the, holier than thou sort of disdain with which it's said. That's the kind of shit that gets to me. But, I might actually to a certain extent agree with the concept when we talk about these archetypes and stuff, is to say, again, I have experienced this firsthand, and it's a pretty well-established phenomenon, is that, again, the archetypes that you're suppressing, that you're trying to avoid, you are gonna actually give more, in a way, more power to. And it's hard because, like I said, right, you have those New Age people who say, if you're anti-war, you're actually giving more power to the negativity by focusing on war. And that sort of shit, I want to say, shove it up your ass. But, this idea of, I would actually argue the person who recognizes that there is a war and goes, that's okay. Well, we're just gonna piece it out. Whatever the frick it is. Like, I see these people like, well, this is a natural thing, or I'm gonna change myself. I can't change the world, I just gotta change myself. So I'm gonna go to this, boutique spa and, spend a week getting my chakras aligned and that'll end the war or some shit. No. Like, you're pampering yourself and you're not actually confronting anything. You have done nothing to help humanity or yourself, in my opinion. That being said, there's a concept in there that I do actually think has a kernel of legitimacy, is the idea of almost like it's drawing you, a part of you is drawing it out. It's forcing you to confront it. Okay, I'm a cigarette smoker. I know I shouldn't be, but I am. If I wake up in the morning with a sore throat and coughing, I sit there and I go, this sucks. I'll drink some water and some coffee and it'll be fine. But pretty much every morning I wake up with a dry throat or whatever. And it's like, there are signs that I choose to ignore that this is having a negative impact on me. In that same sort of way, as I get older and the sort of side effects or the impacts on my health become more obvious, it's something that I'm less able to sort of disregard. It's something that I've had to confront and say, I'm having a hard time making excuses for this anymore. Do you get what I mean? So in that sort of way, that kernel of truth is that we sometimes, it's a shitty truth, but human beings sometimes need things to get bad enough that we're willing to face them. And there's a part of us that wants that. Again, I want to be like, it's a really fine line I'm trying to draw here, and I hope you understand what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. It's like I said, there's a kernel of it that I actually think there's some truth in there.
Well, maybe one of the things, that's a good way to look at that kernel of what you're talking about is in the addictive process, like you said. I mean, you can do that with, tobacco. You can do that with alcohol. You can do that with whatever, food. You can do that with sex. You can do that with shopping. But, when it comes down to it, your unconscious, part of you that wants you to get better or, achieve a better balance in your life is going to keep sending you these signals that you need to change until you get it and change. Or in the case of when you add an addictive process that kills you quick, like alcohol or meth or heroin, or prescription drugs, when you add that layer on top, you put a lot more danger into into it because the substance itself can kill you, not just the,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing, the same I was saying before, where there are these extreme circumstances. So I'm an idiot who managed to get himself addicted to cigarettes, and I'll have to keep fighting this sort of process. If there was somebody who was in a much more severe situation, that it just is that it's something where it's like, okay, you're gonna go through the same cycle at a much faster rate, but you have less time to process what's happening to you. These are all really interesting dynamics that we explore, and I think for most people looking at some of the synchromistic stuff gets, I would almost say there's like different schools of thought, shall we say. There is a school of thought that's very rosy and cheery. They focus explicitly on joy. They say that that's the meaning of life is joy, and that's what it's all about. And they find a way to bring everything back to this very, that's the ultimate goal. And for a long time, I sort of butted heads with them. I mean, they're really nice guys. They're genuinely like really, really nice guys. But like, conceptually, I'm in a very, very different place of how I see this process. But spending a little more time talking to them, what I realized is that they're not, these guys in particular, and I don't mean to paint, I very much agree with you in the sort of New Age, the problem with the modern New Age stuff that gets put out there. But I also realize that it could be it's an issue with the language, is that they're not, like if you talk to them personally, they're not denying that there's any kind of hardship. They have their own hardship in life, but they see that the ultimate goal is to move past that hardship. For me, and I would say maybe the school that, like if you go to the Sync Book website, this sort of type of synchromysticism that you're going to get exposed to there, is a lot more willing to sort of look at the shadow side of things, and say, we can't, even if we're going to agree that the goal is ultimately to be well and to find joy and lightness of spirit, it's going to take looking at these really hard truths, everything from, the medical industrial complex to our own personal psychologies and struggles with addiction and, all these things. Unfortunately, how you look at the, I don't know what you would consider your, I hate to use labels at all, but do you know what I mean? There are movements within the alternative research field. There are truthers and this, that, and the other thing. There are like sort of different genres or subsects of people that seem to gravitate towards certain subjects. But what always sort of amazes me is like any of these things we talk about, the Illuminati, the New World Order, the Bilderbergs, whatever, again, whatever power structure you want to call it, there is something to be said for if you don't look at your own personal psychology at some part in this and your own neuroses and figure out, is there in some way that you are contributing to the evil of the world? If you want to be some guy on the internet who's like, I'm exposing the New World Order and I'm gonna, fight for truth and this better world, then you beat your kids or something, where's the cognitive dissonance there? And I'm not trying to paint anybody in particular as a child abuser or something, but you get what I'm saying. Is like this is again when we say the kernels of truth in this sort of New Age package is to say you do have to work on yourself,
right?
Either before or in tandem with looking at the bigger picture. And that's, again, it's a very, fine line there when someone says, oh, I'm just going to sit in my room and meditate and I'll stop the war in Afghanistan. I don't really think that's going to happen, but it is true that you do need to recognize that this is when we talk about archetypes and the way you play out stories. I can be so judgmental, and so clearly see how wrong it is for a bomb to be dropped on some child in Afghanistan. Maybe it's a lot harder for me to see that I shouldn't have snapped at my wife at lunch or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's a lot harder to see because there's a drastically different scale more often than not. I might have just said some kind of asshole-ish thing, which in the grand scheme of things isn't a huge deal, but on this level, in an intimate relationship, that is an unpleasant thing. And I should recognize that I'm doing it and try and
grow as a person.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Say again?
To grow as a person, and what I do, I look at, one of the things that I do is I look at, psychopathology and scale it up, both on the individual level and, one of the things that we have to, when we look at this stuff and start looking at it, is we have to look at ourselves. If these, motherfuckers are 1% of the population, why have I already met 5 of them in my life, and been intimately involved with one of them? Or, why? You have to ask yourself those questions. What, not necessarily that either on the individual scale, you're taking it on like, I drew this person into my life because, there's something wrong with me, and the same on when we scale it up, like, it's our fault that there's these wars in the world because we voted for them, there's corporations and government and they're all kind of one thing now. So,
that's no better than like a Pat Robertson saying, homosexuals caused Hurricane Katrina,
Right,
to me, it's that
right.
same kind of madness. Like, go fuck yourself. How about it? Yeah, to me that is, like, when I hear some, well-intentioned little new agers say, oh, they say attract that. That to me is no different than a Pat Robertson blaming a hurricane or AIDS on some quote-unquote sinner somewhere. It's the same idea.
And this is why compassion, practicing compassion is so important for yourself and for others, because when you do start doing this shadow work, looking at yourself, looking at, why things happen in your life, what could you possibly have done different in whatever situation didn't go so well for you? You have to sort of not judge yourself too harshly because we already have a culture that's doing that for us, or a bastardization of culture that's doing that for us. Be kind to yourself in the process.
Well said, because again, these are all really valid points, because to me this is not a contradiction, but these are all the different bases that we need to be aware of, right? Because, be aware of your own shadow, do the shadow work, but like I said, also be kind to yourself and love yourself. It's all too easy to walk down the street and see a million different ads on the side of a bus that tell you you're hideous and you're not skinny enough and sexy enough. You don't need to do that shit to yourself. Like, love yourself, know that you are a beautiful person, and to me, it's not a contradiction to say, I constantly want to improve. I constantly want to be a better human. And I also know that I'm already, to a certain extent, I'm already good. Like, I'm not what the marketing people want me to think I am.
Yeah, I'm inherently
I'm not this,
good.
Disgusting ogre, it's like, that needs to buy some cream to rub on myself.
Right.
What I need to do is get rid of those people out of my life, respect myself, appreciate myself, but also, to keep realizing, like, is there something I can do better? And it's not something I can buy in a store. And doesn't mean, oh, I should, vote for this politician or whatever. It's like, is there something I can do, both maybe from an activist standpoint or a personal development standpoint? So, like, that's a really it's a hard thing to juggle. It's like you're looking at, it's like some sort of like 3D chess, it's like all these things are in some way true at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. And we, when we're being honest with ourselves and when we're being compassionate with ourselves, the whole thing about, judgment and what, humans, we're so stupid. We do these terrible things. We're a cancer on the planet. There's all these messages that are coming from, this elite that's at simultaneously all powerful and complete and total buffoons that have no idea who we really are, but they're trying to trick us into thinking that their nature is really human nature, is really what we're all about, So we're, at the same time we're navigating that, what real human nature is, kindness and decency, or, selfish, shallow, getting over on whoever for whatever reason. And a cancer on the planet that's destroying the environment.
Yeah, I don't think we're necessarily a cancer on the earth, but probably human nature is a little bit of both, right? We have the ability for massive amounts of compassion, and we have the ability to be huge pricks. So, any one of us does. So, there are days where I'm like, I can see, I think those are both pretty human, behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, humans, I don't think that a large portion of humans want to hurt people for fun and things like that. That's what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And when tying this into the conversation about healthy sexuality and how, we fetishize because, our culture is all about titillation and not real intimacy. And, we're always getting this messaging about our bodies aren't sacred when they really are. And, about our imperfection that, and for little boys in the United States, all too many of them, it starts at birth when, you need cosmetic surgery, on your penis. But at birth, what? Why? This is,
right.
Huge. And then it continues, all of these messages that we're, that are false about us, about our real true nature.
Sorry, I hope I'm not coming across as trying to, contradict what you're saying, because if we understand, I think you and I actually understand each other very, very well, and I wasn't trying to say, I'm with you. I think basic human nature is actually very well intentioned. I also think that sometimes what is the expression? The road to hell is paved with good intentions was my point to say, like, we can do some pretty nasty things. We are capable of some pretty nasty things, but I do think that it's very rare that people actually want to hurt someone else for fun. I would agree with that. So I actually, do believe that most human beings, particularly if you meet them, it's so easy to just look at a news item or look at the internet or whatever. When you actually sit down with someone and talk to someone, it's pretty clear that most people are actually really nice and well-intentioned, have good hearts and don't want to hurt anyone. So I like I said, sort of that sort of distinction there. I just want to say, as far as I assume you're talking about circumcision for young boys. What must this be? As someone who was circumcised, not much I can do about it at this point in my life. I can't glue it back on. I also, I see this, people talking about this idea of, this horrible thing we do to young boys and all this sort of stuff. I just want to throw out the idea of, again, we should be careful how we talk about that thing, this issue, because it's so easy to very often what we do is we flip an issue, and I'm not trying to accuse you of this. I'm saying the conversation is so easy to get confused. This is just how language seems to work, is we say, at some point we thought, oh, it's really good that everyone does this. So if you didn't do it, it was wrong. And now we've sort of flipped the script somewhat to say it's really wrong if you did. But the same thing, we don't want to create further body issues there's a large percentage of the male population that has already had this done.
That's a good point. Yeah. Body issues.
I should be able to look into my pants and be just as happy with what I see as anyone else should. Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do. I've had 2 C-sections, so you know.
Right. So it's like, as much as I agree that like, we probably don't need to keep doing this, I also don't, I want to be really clear how we phrase the conversation is not to further anyone, not to give someone else body issues, but to say, is this really necessary that we keep doing this? If that makes sense.
And there's gotta be a way to have that conversation, because it has to be had. Somehow it has to be had, because it's an area where there's so much unconsciousness about it. So much unconsciousness about the decision to do that, to your child. And we're back to also the way we interact with the medical community and the medical establishment, who on the one hand, they're telling us, well, your child needs this. But then on the other hand, you're still going to get the bill for cosmetic surgery, because that's what it is, So right. There's a huge level of unconsciousness that goes on when in that process. And so we have to somehow shine a light on it. And, I think you bring up a really good point, because there's got to be a way to sort of, re-sacredize, somebody who does have the strength to come to this, like, this probably shouldn't have happened to me, that sort of within themselves,
Right. And at the same time, without thinking myself as a victim, I don't want to, to the best of my knowledge, I don't really have trauma around it. Like, it's certainly possible that it is there unconsciously. I don't deny that, but, I don't, but I don't ever look down at my dick and go like, oh, what happened? It's like, I have to love it as much as anyone else. I think, whatever, it's like, I'm not trying to make a joke out of it, but to say, I mean this very seriously. We have to all accept where we are at this point in our lives. A lot of things have happened that we didn't have control over. Certain things we were victims of, certain things we weren't. And then there's a mentality of how then do we think about ourselves. And this is what we were talking about, like the person who's hooked on this pharmaceutical drug or this street drug or this whatever, the person who's addicted to shopping. Like, where do we want to place the blame? At what point do we want to call ourselves the victim? At what point do we, all these sort of things are like, it's the same conversation, right? Like, they're different areas of it, but to me it's like really all the same. We kind of keep coming back to that same kernel, that same sort of thing. The hidden issue that we're wrestling with here is like, where do we place the blame? At what point are we the victim? At what point did we have choice in this? At what point did, if some new age person is going to say like, well, a reincarnated soul must have wanted you to experience that trauma so you can process, or something. Like all these. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I have to look at my body more than anyone else. And if I should be able to acknowledge this is who I am and be proud of this is the meat that has gotten me this far. This is the vehicle that I am carrying through life. I can't change it. I'm never gonna get another one, and I better enjoy it. And I don't just mean that in a hedonistic way, but I'm saying like, I shouldn't ever be ashamed, no matter what's been done to you. So,
right. Yeah. And ultimately the only person that can, do that is you. But yes, definitely definitely you have a point about the way that it's spoken about. And I guess, I'll certainly consider that in my in the way that I approach the subject myself, but again, the reason is because there's so much unconsciousness that goes into that decision. Yeah. So that, it's still an important discussion that's not over yet.
Oh, yeah.
Because it hasn't even really got started.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to shoot down your conversation at all. And that's just it. It's to say, I think the thing is, you said you were kind of binging on my stuff this past week. I don't know if you got this sense or not. I don't know how well I kind of convey this, but to me, I feel like all these conversations need to be on the table. I feel like I'm constantly trying to get people to talk about some of the things that are really hard to talk about. And we can still analyze the conversation as we're having it. It's not ever to try and shoot down the conversation. I got into some sort of tricky waters a few months ago, was trying to point out what I considered blatant racism and anti-Semitism coming from a sect of this truth movement, whatever you want to call it. In particular, I was talking about Red Ice Creations, just because I've been on Red Ice a few times. I happen to like their show a whole hell of a lot for many years. I was on a somewhat friendly basis with Henrik and Lana. I don't have a personal grudge against them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I also respect their intellects. I have for many years. And they were trying to say, hey, we want to have this conversation about European peoples being proud and different racial issues, and they were saying we're trying to have a really somewhat make a subtle point that is very easy to misunderstand. They're saying people keep thinking we're racists, but we're actually not. We're trying to make this, other point that's kind of fuzzy in there. And I actually was, even though I think they missed that mark, this is sort of another issue, but I definitely took issue with the way they were framing the conversation. I think they lost the credibility to say that they weren't actually promoting what's essentially a neo-Nazi agenda. And we can go there if you want. I'm totally cool having that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's another important conversation to have, especially now.
Yeah.
I mean, right now. People have been trying to avoid it, and it's something that I've been trying to talk about for a while too, and we talked a little bit about with Andras Jones. But Red Ice is putting out stuff like 10 things you didn't know about Hitler. That was just actually he was really a cool guy, type of stuff. So there's really no turning back at this point. There really isn't. Yeah. And so, as far as with Heinrich and Red Ice, and I've really enjoyed their stuff too, and it's kind of heartbreaking to see this myself. I mean, and I'm not even as invested in it as you who've been on the show and really, developed a rapport. But it's even heartbreaking for me because I've enjoyed a lot of their shows too. And, but I've had issues going on to their Facebook page, just, it was a few months ago. There was
that's where it's most blatant. That is
it's extraordinarily blatant.
Page, it's no holds. Right. On the programs, they're able to go they're able to, be intelligent and they think about what they say before they say it. On that Facebook page, there is no holding back. They are fuck the Jews. Hitler was awesome. It's you can't unsay that.
That's the only
say that. Yes, now you fucking said it.
Yeah, and that's the only place I've ever been called a wagon burner was on the Red Ice Facebook page, because I went in and said, look, actually the story that you did about the Redskins getting their trademark pulled was actually not really well researched. It's not just as simple as you're stating here, that it's just the government, supporting a, agenda, of political correctness. Actually, it's really not that simple. It's not that simple at all. It was a letter writing campaign that was started by mothers like myself, whose children came up to them and said, Mommy, why are they allowed to racially slur us and nobody comes to our defense? Why are they mocking us? Why are they doing this? This is my child said this to me at 6 years old, because we live in an area where there's lots of, Redskins fans. And even as a baby, he would point to the Redskins logo and say, Daddy, and then he saw a game and, was horrified because he knew as a child that him and his people were being mocked. And he said, Mommy, it really sucks to be an Indian, after that. And, heartbroken mothers wrote letters to the trademark office and said, can someone please give a shit about this? That's not the same as the government supporting a political correctness agenda. It's about common human decency.
And there's no part of that is anti-white,
right.
To say, hey, I don't want, and again, it's like what I said before about how easy it is for conversations to get flipped, is to say, I don't want to be mocked is not equivalent to I'm against your people.
Precisely.
You're not going out, you're not saying slurs about white people or whatever the fuck crazy. Honestly, they've talked about, fifth dimensional reptilians. I didn't think they were as crazy as when they started talking about the war on white people. I took a road trip this summer. I spent 2 months driving back and forth across the country, across the United States. Went up into Canada twice. Just went all over this country. Let me tell you something. There's a lot of white people. They are not in danger.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There is no white genocide. It doesn't exist.
It's not right. It's not happening. Right. It's not happening.
And here's
good numbers.
Being a person that's
healthy population.
And that's what they told me too on the Facebook page, was I was anti-white. I was like, well, unlike you that has a symbol for your profile picture, this is actually a picture of me. And I'm kind of pale. So I'm not anti-white. I'm just laying the facts out as I see them. People don't like being mocked. And the big thing about the Redskins is they're like, well, we're honoring you. And it's like, well, newsflash, folks, if the people you say you're honoring don't feel honored, you are not honoring them. It's really simple. Really, really, really simple. But here's where I agree with the red ice. Yes, everybody has the right to be proud of who they are, whatever they are, but where I disagree is that there is no such thing as racial purity. I don't even believe race exists. I think that is something that's been made up, because human beings like to travel and have sex. So there's no, it doesn't exist. That's, and they treat, they're treating it like, people of different races are different species. When you look at the memes and stuff, it's disturbing. It's not furthering the agenda of, authentic European people and people of European descent that just simply want to celebrate their own heritage and their own archetypes and their own stories and their own people's wisdom, their own indigenous people's wisdom. It's what it's doing is,
I would totally support.
Yeah.
Totally support that. And just to be clear, the other side of this is even if they want to go full out Nazi, this is something, sort of maybe a different issue, but to say, like, they got yanked off iTunes, right? They felt like that, once they started talking about like Hitler and Holocaust revisionism, they lost their, iTunes account. I guess, you could argue Apple is a private entity that can make that decision for themselves. It's not, it's not government censorship. It's a corporation's decision to, to give their private property away. You could actually use a private property argument for it. But I would say I would defend their right to say whatever the hell they want to say.
Absolutely.
I know we're kind of running out of time here, but to say, I just read this beautiful written article, about the shootings in France, and this author was saying there was this sort of meme going around of, for everyone to say basically, I am Charlie, right? Like this idea that like we identify with the cartoonist that was killed. And it was this like hashtag that was used on social media and all this sort of stuff. And it was almost like, the Spartacus scene. No, I'm Spartacus. I'm so to say like, we are all this figure. And everyone was using this hashtag, I am Charlie. So, this writer said like, look, I am really bothered by the fact that they would be killed for their statements. But actually, no, I actually didn't like the statements they were making. So to say, like, it was trying to make this argument to say, I can be outraged by their death and still object to what they were doing and still think that they shouldn't have been censored. Like, there's this idea that, I said this, and it was just because this is something that I've been having this conversation for months, and this recent shooting sort of made it of like a viral conversation, was that apparently in the last few days, this quasi-Voltaire quote, it's actually argued whether or not Voltaire actually said it, but I don't agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And this has been something the point I've been trying to make for months now is to say, I don't think they should be censored. I don't think I should be censored when I say I don't agree with them. I don't think they should be censored when they say they don't agree with me. However, people they conflate the two. If I say I disagree with Red Ice, they say, oh, you're censoring them, you see? If you're not allowed to have a conversation about Jews, that shows who really runs the world. I'm going, no, you have every right to have the conversation. My defending your right to free speech, however, should not be confused with condoning your speech. This is like, to me, like a point that I don't know why people can't wrap their fucking minds around.
Yeah. It's real easy.
I defend, it's in this statement. I may not agree with what you say, but I defend your right to say it. And then people think, if I disagree with you, I'm somehow censoring you. No. I also defend my own freedom of speech. You get to say whatever you want, and I get to say, you're wrong, or I disagree with you for XYZ reasons. And that is a free society. This point where we come to, where we all have to agree whether we have to support the satirists, or we have to support the Islamists, or we have to support Red Ice, or we have to support the liberal New Ager who thinks they're raised, like whatever. It's like, I don't have to take sides. I actually don't have to take sides. I get to express my point of view, and everyone else gets to express their point of view. And I just sort of want to throw that into the mix. As I said, like I know I kind of keep throwing these almost counter arguments to what I'm saying, but it's to say, I am so in agreement with you on what Red Ice has been doing, but I also, only because I've been beating my head against this wall for the last few months, I want to make this very, very clear. I think they should not be restricted in any way from saying it. I just wish they'd put some fucking thought into what they were saying, because they might realize how stupid it is.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, why? I mean, why? That's my main thing, why? And to me, I mean, I said it in my blog, I think that the whole neo-Nazi thing, they want to suck the energy out of this authentic resurgence that's going on with Europeans, the ones that we can both get behind. And that's what it's going to do. If we don't talk about it, it's going to do exactly that. It's going to snuff, that, fire right out that's raging right now and happening. And that's can be a good force in the world. And a huge step towards healing everybody. Because really, Europeans have been programmed to hate themselves too in a different way, in a way that all Europeans are responsible for all of the, oppression that exists in the world today, which of course we know is not true. Does that mean racism doesn't exist and that, people with lighter skin don't have certain privileges that people with darker skin don't have? No. These are, again, seemingly opposing simultaneous realities, that do exist all the time.
Yeah, and it's not some Orwellian doublethink. I've grown pretty comfortable with some of these seeming contradictions, and I don't feel that I've succumbed to some sort of a doublethink. I think we are able to realize that human beings are incredibly complex creatures, and their social interactions are incredibly complex. And sometimes people, more often than not, as you say, a person with lighter skin is going to have certain advantages in this world that a person with darker skin doesn't have. If I get pulled over by a cop versus my friend gets pulled over by a cop, we have two different skin tones, I'm going to be grateful in that situation that I'm probably not going to get my ass beat, but he might. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just a reality. It's a very unfortunate reality, and to somehow deny that, to me, is like walking around, going, with fingers in the air, going, nah, I don't hear that, I don't see it, not true, not happening. I don't see how you can ignore such a reality. Their sort of argument that this, racial issues can be used to manipulate or be used for political agendas, I would agree with, again, a certain aspect of that. Again, everything, if you look at the world stage, nearly everything that you could care about will be used to manipulate in some way. If you're someone who's pro-choice or pro-life, there's a politician out there who's going to tell you that belief system means you should vote for him or give his corporation money or whatever the heck it is, right? You're a Christian, you should eat at Chick-fil-A, whatever the heck it is. So you would see sometimes really innocently and sometimes pretty sinisterly anything that you could possibly care about. You care about your heritage? Well, step right up. Have we got an agenda for you? Everything will be used, can potentially be used to manipulate you, or at least someone can attempt to do so. It is our challenge to reclaim, to dig through the bullshit and find the true spirit of the things that are important. So, yes, religion and spirituality has been used to sell everything on the face of the planet, from authoritarian governments to shampoos and shitty fast food cheeseburgers. That doesn't mean that we dismiss any connection to our spiritual selves. Someone can use skin tone and racial issues as a way for political manipulation within Sweden and the European Union, etc., etc. That doesn't mean that suddenly, Swedish people are superior to black people, or that Hitler was actually fucking awesome. None of these things don't, 2 + 2 does not equal 5. That to me is the true Orwellian sort of confusion, that somehow people manage to flip a switch in their brain and and let themselves be tricked by this propaganda rather than actually thinking it through and going, okay, this is true. How can I dig through that crap and find what is the real heart of the matter here? And the heart of the matter might actually be that if Henrik was honest with himself, he could say, hey, my politicians are manipulating my country through racial propaganda, and guess what? And I'm sure every brown person on the planet would stand up and go, yeah, me too. Maybe we should work together to stop that. You know, like, I feel like that could happen if you took a different approach. Hey, are your politicians screwing with you based on your skin tone and your belief systems? Is there a person on the face of the planet that couldn't agree with that and stand behind that, and we could find an area of commonality and work together to free ourselves?
Yeah, because, I mean, ultimately,
so drastic.
Yeah, it makes more sense. But, again, we either allow ourselves to get tricked, or, maybe some people are more, not trickable than others. And the odd thing is that it's the darkness that, that part of the spiritual journey, that clues you into those things, makes you not as trickable, makes more conscious. I keep asking why, and I'm going to continue to ask why, and I'm going to continue to be dumbfounded. And, the other thing is that, like Thomas Sheridan was pointing out on his Facebook page today, I think, and yesterday, like, there's really nothing new under the sun. All of the issues that you see in the alternative right now, we've seen it all before. And he's been posting links to these like vintage conspiracy magazines and things like that. And it's all the same stuff. Even the Nazi issue, was going on years ago and has gone on before. And, why does humanity keep coming back to this? What is it, that has us so focused on that and on the Middle East? Why, has the whole world been focused on the Middle East for so long? What is that all about?
Right. When most of us don't live there, we'll never visit there. Your blog about this, I listened to most of your conversation with Andras, and I only wasn't able to finish listening because I was actually listening to it live and I had to leave the house. But I listened to a good section of your conversation. I don't know if you guys actually touched this, but the idea of this idea of like, okay, why I saw Thomas Sheridan's thing, and he said, if we judge your answer to the Middle East question, are you pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli, these sort of two sides, are you a Coke or a Pepsi? There's no third option. You have to care. This is something that Andras very explicitly, like with myself, we had an issue. I run this website, thesyncbook.com. We have multiple different podcasts and different radio shows and all this sort of stuff. And there was a gentleman, I know you just spoke to his wife, Mater X. So Frater X and Mater X did a show for Sync Book Radio. And there was I have no beef with them. I'm not trying to start beef with them. They left because they saw that we weren't on the same page on this sort of issue, but it was actually between Andras and a guest of their radio show, had this sort of schism where the guy said to Andras, since Andras is a Jew, Andras is supposed to vocally speak out against Israel and the Israeli oppression. And Andras said, I've never been there. I'm not an Israeli citizen. I've never been there. I don't know enough about it. I'm a Jewish guy living in America. Why does my, that make me, I'm supposed to have an opinion on this political stance.
Yeah.
And, it's sort of snowballed into this thing that he, I get that, like, to one extent, I totally get, like, wanting to get Andras to speak out against a war crime or something, but his point was like, I don't know what else to tell you. I don't have an opinion on this. I'm not from there. I'm from the United States. Ask me something about the United States. I can speak about it. I've never been to the Middle East. Don't fucking know. That's not my area of expertise. What do you want me to say? And, so I just turned to this whole thing. It's a really sticky situation. I'm not trying to poke that hornet's nest, but to say like, this is, when I saw Thomas Sheridan's post, that was just like, ding, ding, ding. This was the exact conversation we were trying to have, was like, why was it that he had to have an opinion? And the article that I was referring to was talking about how, Muslims were being sort of told, you have to tweet out something saying you disown these Muslim extremists, and saying like, this other writers saying like, why the fuck do every time some crazy Muslim person does something in the world, I have to go and to Twitter and Facebook and say to everyone, hey, guess what? I don't agree with that guy. Like, when, some white guy shoots up a shopping mall, do I have to take to Twitter and say, hey, guess what? I might be white too, but I'm not with him? Like, why are we doing these things where we're assuming certain people have to explain where their loyalties lie? I mean, to me, this is everything so far removed from the sort of concepts of freedom that whether it's a truth 9/11 truth, more general truth movement, alternative research, American Patriot Movement, all these different names for these different genres. But the one thing that would kind of seem to tie everyone together is like, hey, we want to be free. We're trying to promote freedom, dispel ignorance, and have more freedom. So why the hell would you impose your own sort of fascist, totalitarian, like one-size-fits-all truth onto everyone else? And anyone who, they have to pledge allegiance to your ideology, your view of the elephant. It's like, it's insanity to me.
It is.
I remember going to some sort of thing, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. I guess about 10 years ago. Went to something that was a John Birch Society table there. Now that's a whole other issue, but I remember having this conversation with these like 50-year-old John Birch guys, and it's kind of what Thomas Sheridan was saying, how this has all been talked about a long time. They were going, we don't get you kids. We know who the bad guys are. We've known about this control system for 50, 60, 70 years. Why don't you just listen to us? We've already got it figured out. Why do you keep trying to do all this research and reinvent the wheel? We've already got it figured out. Just listen to us. And in one respect, there's the idea of like, hey, here's people who have been looking at this for a long time and they have information that's probably worth listening to. Agreed. At the same time, don't ever tell me, stop questioning because, I'll save you all this time. Just take my truth. It'll work for you. It's like, no, I have to find it for myself. Because my truth so far has not led me to become a John Bircher, and,
right. So. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Why do we have to pick sides there? And why? I did talk to Andres Jones about, that show and how it went down. And I did listen to the show as well. And I just, I think that maybe unconsciousness could have played into that as well. And things don't always go as planned. Sometimes, I mentioned that I thought that Andras was put in the position to defend his humanity. That's what it felt like listening to it. And I know what it's like to be in that situation. And that's why I invited him onto the show, because I wanted to give him the space to, be who he really is, rather than what was kind of projected onto him, I guess, onto that show, during that show, whether it was intentional or not, which I would guess it was not, but, I don't know.
You're right. I don't think it was. I said, Fredericks and Matterex are awesome people. I've been to their house. I mean, we were very friendly. Like I said, like, I was very, I feel like when you say about human nature, I think everybody isn't, like, really, like I said, I've had conversations with Henrik and Lana. They're really nice people. I strongly disagree with this direction they've gone in. I don't see how the fuck they're going to dig themselves out of this stance. And it's a pretty dark road ahead of them, as it seems to me. I have, I have a lot of strong feelings about it all, that I don't necessarily need to express it all in the next 2 minutes, but to say, like, I have really strong feelings about it. That doesn't mean that they were, it's hard to, I'm not putting anyone on a pedestal, but I'm not trying to trash anyone personally either. I feel like everyone's doing the best they can, and everyone's gonna have to kind of figure it out. And at the point at which, if we disagree strongly enough, we're going to be working at opposite ends. We might be, for all intents and purposes, as sort of quasi-opponents in that respect. But, at the end of the day, or at the end of the lifespan, I'd like to be able to shake hands and say, I hope it worked out for you. If in some way,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also the issue of, critiquing someone's work, as well. I mean, we can critique each other's work without there being an attachment to that, like you're a horrible person because I didn't agree with you about this, that doesn't have to be attached
you're an
either.
Agent. You're a,
right.
What about that?
Yeah.
Oh, if I disagree with you, then you must be a CIA agent planted to throw everyone off from the real truth. Come on, like, can we just have a disagreement?
Yeah.
Like I said, like the whole Nazi thing, it gets hard for me to just keep it a friendly disagreement, because I think this has very dangerous ramifications for a lot of people. Like, there are very real, there's a difference between some guy who says, I think it was nanothermite. No, I think it was in fake airplanes or whatever, like there's that kind of disagreement within the truth movement. And then there's the idea of like, hey, I think Hitler was awesome and we should start a neo-Nazi movement. Like,
right.
It's getting really hard for me to keep this a friendly disagreement. But,
yeah, this is where we part ways. Like, Yeah. There's no turning back really from that at all.
Right.
But, but it doesn't have to be like, a war. It doesn't. It can be like, well, okay, that's where you're at and I'm totally not there. So pursue other discussions and ideas, but you still have to look at it because it's there. And again, I do warn that it will, unless it's, because there's this other thing going on. People are like, well, maybe we really shouldn't talk about it. Not a lot of people are willing to talk about it right now. They're like, well, I don't want to upset anyone, but it's like, why are we doing this then if we're not going to talk about what really matters to us? What is our truth, not beating people over the head with it, but, a sincere, like, we're trying to look at history, the things that have happened before, and, why can't we, like, not go that direction again? Because it didn't turn out very well.
Do you know what I've found to be the most freeing experience of the last few months? It was facing that reality, because I know a lot of these alternative research figures who, as you say, they don't want to rock the boat of red ice. Red ice, as someone, again, like, they can sell a lot of fucking books for you. They can get you a lot of web traffic. They can give you a lot of credibility if you want to, if you're trying to make a career or, make a name for yourself and this sort of thing. Let me tell you something. Red ice still holds a lot of freaking sway. And there's a lot of people who don't want to rock that boat. They don't want to turn off that income stream. If I said, hey, Red Ice is awesome, and I, kissed their ass and tried to show up on their show every few, months and sell some books, it would work out pretty well for me. And for anyone who's willing to do that. I'm telling you, I've had conversations. People don't want to rock that boat.
Yes, I've had them too.
It's unfortunate they hold that power. And something really liberating happened was, I was like, I've been doing this for a really long time and I'm not making money. I'm not, I feel like I've
there was a few years where I did like the interview circuit. I'm doing your show today. I don't really do many interviews anymore. I'm pretty just like kind of doing my thing, and it's like I don't have to pretend I'm anything that I'm not. I can just, it's not like an indifference, but it's like a stopped caring, not like I said, not an indifferent sort of not caring, but I'm not worried about how I'm perceived anymore. Like, I'm just gonna say my truth, I'm gonna do my thing, and if you're, if you enjoy, I've been doing this new show, Sync Quick News, where I've been trying to do something that's a little more,
which is fantastic. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been pretty well. It's been pretty well received, and I think part of that comes from, like I said, just kind of like letting go. It's like, honestly, like I have no attachment to it. Like when every week I make a show, I put a lot of work into it, but it's like once it's done, it's out there, and whatever people are going to think of it, they're going to think of it. Whereas like other projects that I take more seriously, like I will write and rewrite and okay, I want to get this exactly perfect. Whereas this, it's like, I'm just going to go out there, have some fun, and speak my truth, and people can dig it or not. And it's been very liberating.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I am, and I've always been an outsider wherever I go. I'm not white enough to be white, I'm not Indian enough to be Indian. I'm too tall to be a girl. I don't know. I've always been an outsider. So I pretty much figured that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, is to actually just really lay it out there and be truthful. And I'm finding that the more truthful that I am, the more people can relate to me, because, it's needed. So, I'll just continue to be the outsider, but I'm meeting some great people along the way, like yourself, and enjoying some really fantastic conversations, and giving myself and others an outlet for what's maybe missing or marginalized in the overarching culture. Just having always been an outsider, so it is an honor to talk to you. It is a pleasure, and I'm really glad that you took the time to talk to me today.
I'm really glad you asked me. Like as I said, I've been doing a lot of interviews in the last year, and but I saw you around online, and I know Thomas Sheridan, and I was sort of seemed like we were on the same page. And then when I spoke to Andras about his conversation with you, and I listened to part of that show, and I was like, okay, this is someone really cool, and I would be really excited to actually talk to you. So this has been, and this far exceeded my expectations even still. So this has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, and maybe we could have you back, maybe you and Andras together, and have a three-way conversation or something like that. I would like to read Andras's book and read more of your stuff, and have you all back if you like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, anytime. And same way. Like I do the Sync Quick News is like a short 5-minute video segment every week, but I also do a radio show called Always Record for Sync Book Radio, and that's almost every Thursday. We take about every 3 weeks we take a week off. But I'd love to have you on anytime, and just keep talking. To me, that's the answer that I keep coming around to is, it's very rare that I find someone I agree with 100%. Maybe sometimes 80, sometimes 90, sometimes 95. But I've never found someone I agree with 100%. But God, do I love talking to people and sort of trying to hash it out, because I always learn something and get a different perspective. And to me, that's how we all progress.
Absolutely. Well, let's kick it off with a victory song here. Eyuha natam pelo velo. Lakota hokshila he tinkacha eyuha natam pe. Tinkashiraya pitawa pahacha eyuha natam pelo velo. Eyuha natam pelo